The invitation. Ethan Cole had never been so alone. His spaceship was a wreck, scattered across the rocky plains of an unknown planet. The crash had destroyed most of his supplies, and his oxygen levels were dropping fast. His helmet visor flickered with warnings, but he had no way to call for help. No signal, no backup, and no idea where he was. The sky above was a swirling mix of deep blue and violet, with two suns hanging low on the horizon. Strange mountains rose in the distance, their peaks glowing faintly, as if they held some hidden energy. The air was thick, filled with the scent of something unfamiliar, something not of Earth. Ethan stumbled forward, his legs weak from the crash. He had to move. Staying near the wreckage was pointless. If this planet had intelligent life, he needed to find them. Otherwise, he was as good as dead. After what felt like hours of walking, he saw it. A city. It was hidden beneath a shimmering dome, a vast metropolis of sleek towers and glowing streets. The buildings were smooth and curved, unlike anything he had seen before. Strange symbols flickered on the walls, pulsing with a soft light. From a distance, it looked peaceful, welcoming even, but something about it felt wrong. Ethan hesitated. Was it safe to go inside? He had no weapon, no protection. But he had no choice. His oxygen was running low, and he wouldn't survive the night. As he stepped closer, the dome shimmered and opened, as if it had been expecting him. A figure stood at the entrance. She was tall and slender, with pale silver skin that shimmered under the twin suns. Her eyes were large, glowing with a faint golden light. Long, flowing hair cascaded down her back, moving as if it had a life of its own. She smiled. "Welcome," she said, her voice soft, almost musical. Ethan froze. She spoke his language. "How?" "I am Lyra," she continued. "You are not the first to arrive here, but you are special." The way she said it made his skin crawl. Ethan swallowed his fear and nodded. I need help. My ship crashed. I'm running out of oxygen." Lyra's smile never faded. "Come with me. You will be safe." Something deep inside him screamed not to follow her. But what choice did he have? As he stepped inside, the city pulsed with life. The streets were busy with other beings, all humanoid but slightly different from Lyra. Some had translucent skin, others had elongated fingers that moved too fast. They watched him as he walked past, their eyes filled with something he couldn't understand. Curiosity, fear, or something worse. Lyra led him to a sleek, white building. Inside, the air was cool, and a faint humming sound filled the space. Strange symbols floated in the air, shifting and changing as if they were alive. "You must be tired," Lyra said, gesturing to a soft-looking chair. "Rest. Eat. You are safe here." Ethan hesitated. Safe. He wasn't so sure. Still, he sat down, and a plate of food appeared before him. The meal was unlike anything he had ever seen. Brightly colored, slightly glowing. It smelled sweet and familiar, almost like home. He picked up a piece, but before he could take a bite, he noticed something. Lyra was watching him. Not just watching, studying him. "You are different from the others," she murmured. "Stronger." Ethan's stomach twisted. "What do you mean, others?" Lyra blinked, as if she had said too much. "Rest now, Ethan. We will talk later." His heart pounded. How did she know his name? He had never told her. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air too still. Something wasn't right. As he lay back in the chair, trying to steady his breathing, he noticed something in the far corner of the room. A shadow, barely visible, shifting as if it was watching him too. Ethan closed his eyes, pretending to rest. But his mind was screaming. He was not safe. The too perfect hospitality. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He kept his breathing slow, his body still, but his mind was racing. The city was too perfect. The people were too quiet. And Lyra, she was too interested in him. Every instinct in his body told him something was wrong. He cracked one eye open, scanning the dimly lit room. The walls pulsed faintly, shifting in color like a slow heartbeat. The air was thick with something sweet, almost drugging. His limbs felt heavy, but he forced himself to stay alert. Then he saw it. A shadow in the far corner. It wasn't human. It wasn't Lyra. It was something else. Ethan stayed completely still. He didn't know if it could see him, but it was watching, studying. The way it shifted, like a wisp of black smoke curling and uncurling, made his skin crawl. Then, as if sensing his awareness, it disappeared into the walls. He sat up instantly, heart pounding. Was it real? Or was he hallucinating from exhaustion? A soft chime rang through the room. The walls brightened slightly, and the door slid open with a smooth hiss. Lyra stepped in. "Good morning, Ethan," she said warmly. "I hope you rested well." Ethan forced himself to stay calm. "Yeah, thanks for the hospitality." She smiled, but her golden eyes flickered, just for a second. A micro-expression, barely noticeable. "She knows I didn't sleep." "Come," she said, stepping aside. "I want to show you our city." Ethan had no choice. He needed answers. As they walked through the streets, the city felt alive. The buildings hummed softly, shifting as if they were breathing. The pathways glowed under his feet, responding to his movements. Strange, elegant creatures floated in the sky, their wings translucent like liquid crystal. Yet, despite its beauty, the city was too quiet. No laughter, no shouting, no casual conversations. The people walked with silent purpose, their faces unreadable. When they saw him, they stopped, just for a moment. Their heads tilted, their expressions blank, and then they moved on, like puppets returning to script. Ethan's stomach twisted. Something was very, very wrong here. "You are special, Ethan," Lyra said suddenly, breaking the silence. He looked at her sharply. "You keep saying that. What does it mean?" She glanced at him, her expression soft, almost adoring. "You are different from the others who came before." Ethan stopped walking. "Others?" Lyra hesitated, just for a second. Then she smiled again, but now he could see it, the calculation behind her eyes. "Yes," she admitted. "You are not the first traveler to arrive here." A cold wave washed over Ethan. "What happened to them?" he asked carefully. Lyra's smile didn't fade. "They could not stay." Ethan's fingers twitched. "Where are they now?" She reached out, touching his wrist gently. Her skin was cool, unnaturally smooth. "Come," she said softly. "I want to show you something." She led him to a towering, spiral structure at the city's center. The doors opened without a sound, revealing a massive chamber lined with tall, glass-like pods. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Inside each pod was a body. Not alien. Human. Some were wearing spacesuits, their helmets removed, eyes closed in eternal sleep. Others were in strange, thin garments, their bodies unnaturally still. Suspended. Preserved. A graveyard. A trophy case. His blood ran cold. Lyra stepped beside him, watching his reaction carefully. "They did not survive the transformation," she said, her voice calm. Almost apologetic. Ethan took a step back. "What transformation?" She turned to him, and for the first time, he saw something new in her expression. Pity. "You do not understand yet," she said gently. "But you will." Ethan clenched his fists. His instincts were screaming. Run. Now. But before he could move, the room darkened. A deep, thrumming sound filled the chamber, vibrating through his bones. The pods flickered, their occupants twitching slightly, as if responding to the noise. And then, for the first time, one of them opened. The body inside took a breath. Ethan's heart stopped. The figure inside, once human, turned its head. Its eyes were golden, just like Lyra's. And it smiled. Trapped in paradise. Ethan took a step back, his breath sharp and uneven. The pod creaked open fully, releasing a hiss of cold air. The once human figure inside moved, stretching its fingers. Too long now, too unnatural. Its golden eyes locked onto Ethan's, and a slow smile crept across its face. It was awake. And it was not human anymore. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to run, but he was frozen. The other pods began to glow, as if responding to the awakening one. The soft humming sound in the chamber turned into a low rhythmic pulse. Lyra stepped forward, completely calm. "Do not be afraid, Ethan," she said softly. "They have evolved, just as you will." He snapped out of his shock and bolted for the door. Lyra didn't stop him. She simply watched, her golden eyes glowing with something unreadable. Ethan's boots pounded against the smooth floor as he ran through the corridors. The walls shimmered, shifting in colors that pulsed like a heartbeat. The city outside was still eerily perfect, too clean, too silent. But now he knew the truth. This wasn't a paradise. It was a trap. No escape. He had to get out. Had to get to the outskirts of the city. Maybe find his ship. Anything to put distance between him and whatever these creatures were. But the streets were not empty anymore. The citizens of the city, once just watching him, were now moving. Not towards him directly, but shifting, positioning themselves. He was being herded. Ethan turned down a narrow passage between two glowing towers, hoping to lose them. But as soon as he turned the corner, a figure was already there, waiting. Not Lyra. Not a human. Something else. It stood motionless, its body slightly blurred, as if reality couldn't quite hold its form. Its golden eyes shined like twin stars, unblinking. Ethan backed away. His heart pounded. "Stay away," he warned. The thing tilted its head. Then it spoke, but not out loud. It spoke inside his mind. "You were never supposed to leave." Ethan gasped, stumbling backward. His head ached from the voice. It was like 1,000 whispers layered on top of each other, ancient and hollow. The creature took a step forward. The space around it warped slightly, like heat rising from pavement. Ethan turned and ran the other way. The city won't let him go. He sprinted toward the main road, pushing past the silent citizens. Their golden eyes followed him, but they didn't speak. They didn't react. They didn't have to. Because the city itself was changing. The smooth streets that once led toward the exit now curved, shifting under his feet. Buildings moved, corridors stretched longer, pathways twisted. Ethan skidded to a stop. He was running in circles. The city was alive, and it didn't want him to leave. He spun around, breath ragged. Lyra stood a few feet away, calm as ever. "You don't understand yet," she said, tilting her head. "You are not a prisoner, Ethan. You are becoming." He clenched his fists. Becoming what? Her smile was almost sad. "One of us." Ethan took a step back. His mind raced. He had to think, had to find a way out. That's when he noticed something. A young alien, different from the others. Smaller, less controlled, with wide, frightened eyes. He was hiding behind a pillar, watching Ethan. And when Ethan met his gaze, the boy did something unexpected. He motioned for Ethan to follow him. Ethan hesitated for only a second. Then, ignoring Lyra's voice behind him, he ran toward the boy. A secret ally. The boy led him through a hidden tunnel beneath the city. It was narrow, dark, and nothing like the gleaming paradise above. The walls were cracked, the air damp. The hum of the city above faded as they went deeper. Finally, they reached a small chamber, lit only by a faint blue glow. The boy turned to him, eyes filled with urgency. "They're lying to you," he said quickly. "You don't have much time." Ethan's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. "Who are you?" The boy hesitated. "My name is Taro. I was like you. Once." Ethan stiffened. "What do you mean?" Taro swallowed. They took me. They changed me. But it didn't work completely. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Changed you into what? Taro's face darkened. Not everyone survives the process. The ones that do, they aren't themselves anymore. Ethan felt his stomach drop. And the ones that don't. Taro looked away. They're in the pods. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. He had been right. This city wasn't a sanctuary. It was a harvesting ground. For humans. Taro grabbed his arm. You need to leave. There's a way out, but it's dangerous. Ethan frowned. If you know how to escape, why are you still here? Taro hesitated. Then, in a low whisper, he said, because they can still hear me. Ethan's blood ran cold. Hear you. Taro swallowed hard. They're listening. Right now. Suddenly, the walls shifted. The air grew thicker. A voice, smooth and too close, echoed all around them. You should not have done that, Taro. The chamber began to collapse. Ethan barely had time to move before the walls cracked apart, revealing glowing golden eyes emerging from the darkness. Taro grabbed Ethan's wrist and pulled him forward. Run. The ritual. Ethan ran. The ground beneath him trembled as the tunnels collapsed. The walls groaned, shifting as if they were alive, trying to swallow him whole. A deafening hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. Behind him, the golden-eyed figures emerged from the darkness, their bodies shifting like liquid, as if reality itself struggled to hold their forms. Taro yanked Ethan forward, his grip tight with desperation. Faster. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading them deeper underground. The air grew colder, thinner. The walls pulsed, their surfaces writhing like living veins. Ethan's breath came in ragged gasps, his body screaming for rest. But he couldn't stop. If he did, he was dead. Or worse. The humming grew unbearable, vibrating through his skull like an infection. Ethan clenched his jaw, pushing through the dizziness. Then, suddenly, light, a small opening ahead. The tunnel widened into a massive underground cavern, illuminated by an eerie blue glow. Strange, floating crystals lined the ceiling, casting long shadows across the walls. Ethan skidded to a stop, his heart hammering. And then he saw it. At the center of the cavern stood an altar, a towering ancient structure carved from smooth black stone. Strange symbols pulsed across its surface, shifting and changing as if they were alive. And above it, suspended in midair, was a human body. Not dead, not alive, changing. Its skin rippled, shifting between human and something else, something wrong. Ethan took a shaky step back. What the hell is this? Taro's face was pale. The ritual. Ethan turned to him. What ritual? Taro swallowed hard. The one meant for you. The truth comes out. A soft, familiar voice filled the cavern. You were always meant to be more, Ethan. He spun around. Lyra stood at the entrance of the cavern, her golden eyes glowing. Behind her, the golden-eyed figures emerged, moving too smoothly, too perfectly. They weren't running. They didn't need to. They knew he had nowhere left to go. Ethan clenched his fists. What is this place? Lyra took a slow step forward, her expression unreadable. This is where it happens, where the weak become strong, where the mortal become infinite. Ethan's skin crawled. You mean where you steal our bodies? Lyra tilted her head. Not steal. Transform. We do not kill. We do not destroy. We only evolve. She gestured toward the floating figure above the altar. Ethan stared, his stomach twisting in horror. This one resisted at first, too, Lyra continued. But in the end, he became one of us. Just as you will. Ethan shook his head, his body tensing. That's not going to happen. Lyra's smile was gentle. Too gentle. It already is. The horror begins. Ethan's breath caught. His hands, were tingling. At first, he thought it was just adrenaline, but then he saw it, his veins, glowing faintly. A dull ache spread through his skull, a deep pulsing inside his mind, as if something was pushing against his thoughts. A whisper, soft and familiar. "Stop fighting it, Ethan." He clenched his head, squeezing his eyes shut. No, no, no. The glow in his veins pulsed. Lyra watched, calm as ever. The change has already begun. Ethan refused to believe it. He staggered back, but his body felt heavy. His legs trembled, his breath uneven. The whisper in his head grew louder. "You are chosen. You are meant to be more. You are one of us." Ethan let out a snarl and grabbed a sharp fragment of crystal from the ground. Before anyone could react, he slashed his own arm. A deep, searing cut. Blood oozed from the wound. Red. Human. Ethan exhaled shakily. He was still himself. For now. Lyra sighed, almost disappointed. "You fight, just like they all do." She raised her hand. Instantly, the golden-eyed figures moved. Taro grabbed Ethan's arm. "Run." But before they could, the altar lit up. The cavern shook, and the floating body opened its eyes. The failed ones. A deep, inhuman sound filled the air. A distorted, painful gasp. The figure above the altar convulsed violently. Its body twisted, warped, broken beyond recognition. Ethan watched in horror as the transformation failed. The thing inside the body tried to escape. It screamed, a guttural, alien sound of something not meant to exist. Lyra didn't even flinch. The golden-eyed figures moved forward, surrounding the altar. The moment they touched the failed one, its body disintegrated into ash. Gone. Erased. As if it had never existed. Lyra turned back to Ethan, unshaken. Some do not survive. They are incompatible. Ethan clenched his fists. "And if I'm one of them?" Lyra smiled. "Then you will cease to be." A cold sweat broke across his skin. They weren't just changing people. They were experimenting. And when it failed, they simply erased the evidence. He wasn't a guest. He was a test subject. And he was running out of time. The last chance. Taro tugged on Ethan's sleeve, desperation in his eyes. "There's another way out, but we have to move now." Ethan didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, knocking over one of the golden-eyed figures. The moment his body made contact with it, he felt it, cold, empty, like touching a shell with nothing inside. The figure collapsed instantly, as if it had no real bones. They weren't real. They were puppets. Ethan grabbed a piece of the broken crystal altar, wielding it like a blade. "Let's go." Taro nodded and sprinted toward a small passage hidden behind the altar. Lyra sighed, almost disappointed. "You cannot escape your fate, Ethan." He glared at her. "Watch me." Then, without another word, he and Taro disappeared into the tunnels. Behind them, the golden-eyed figures followed. The ritual wasn't over yet. The escape plan. Ethan ran. The tunnel walls pulsed like the inside of a living creature. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. The ground beneath his feet was smoothed, too smooth, as if the entire place had been grown rather than built. Behind them, the golden-eyed figures moved without sound. They didn't run. They didn't stumble. They simply drifted forward, closing the distance inch by inch. Taro was ahead, moving fast despite his small frame. "This way," he whispered, turning sharply down another passage. Ethan followed, his breath ragged. His arms still tingled with the strange energy Lyra had awakened inside him. The glow in his veins was fading, but he could still feel it. Something foreign inside him. Something changing. His time was running out. They had to escape. Now. The city is alive. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber, far below the city's surface. Unlike the pristine streets above, this place was old. The walls were cracked, covered in markings Ethan didn't recognize. Strange symbols pulsed faintly, their glow flickering. Taro hurried to a massive metallic door embedded in the stone. He placed his palm on it, and the markings shifted, forming a new shape. A small opening hissed as it unlocked. Ethan stepped forward, but then the ground rumbled. A deep, echoing hum filled the chamber. The walls trembled as the entire space came to life. Taro's face went pale. They know we're here. The golden-eyed figures emerged from the tunnel behind them, moving faster now. Their eyes glowed brighter, their bodies shifting unnaturally as they advanced. And then Lyra stepped forward. She didn't rush. She didn't chase. She simply walked, her golden gaze locked onto Ethan's. "There is nowhere left to run," she said softly. "You were never meant to leave, Ethan." Ethan clenched his fists. "Watch me." He shoved through the doorway just as Taro slammed his hand onto the panel. The door sealed shut, cutting them off from the creatures outside. For a second, silence. Then a voice, not spoken, but inside his mind. "You cannot run from what you are becoming." Ethan pressed his hands against his temples, gritting his teeth. He could feel her inside his head. Taro pulled him forward. "We're almost there. Come on." The escape route. The passage beyond the door was different. The walls weren't smooth and organic like the rest of the city. These were metal. Old. Human-made. Ethan stopped. "Wait. This isn't part of the city." Taro turned to him, eyes filled with urgency. "It was once, a long time ago." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" Taro hesitated. Then, in a hushed voice, he said, "This place, it wasn't always theirs." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Are you saying humans built this?" Taro nodded. "Or something like humans." Before Ethan could respond, the tunnel shook violently. A deep guttural roar echoed behind them, followed by the sound of something breaking through metal. Ethan turned just in time to see the door buckle inward. Lyra was still outside, but she wasn't alone anymore. Behind her, something huge moved in the darkness. A shape, a presence, a living nightmare. Taro grabbed Ethan's wrist. "We have to go. Now." Ethan turned and ran. The final obstacle. The tunnel twisted, leading them deeper into the unknown. Then, suddenly, it opened into a massive underground hangar. Ethan's eyes widened. In the center of the hangar sat a ship. Not alien. Human. Rust-covered, damaged, but still intact. The markings on its hull were faded, but Ethan could still read them. Earth Exploration Vessel. RK-17. Ethan's heart pounded. This ship was old. Decades, maybe centuries old. But it was their way out. Taro ran to the control panel, typing frantically. "I can get it open. I've studied the systems." A metallic shriek rang out. Ethan spun around. The tunnel collapsed inward, and Lyra stepped through the debris. But she wasn't alone anymore. Behind her, the creature followed. It was massive, its body shifting between solid and impossible. Its golden eyes burned like dying stars, its shape twisting with no true form. Lyra tilted her head. "This is your last chance, Ethan." The ship's engines hummed to life. Ethan didn't hesitate. He grabbed a rusted metal pipe from the floor and hurled it at the console's power supply. Sparks exploded, overloading the system. The ship's hangar doors screeched open, revealing the outside world. A howling wind rushed in. The pressure pulled everything forward, including the golden-eyed figures behind Lyra. Taro grabbed onto the ship's hatch, barely holding on. Ethan turned. Lyra was right behind him. She reached for him, her golden eyes filled with something he couldn't name. Not anger, not hate. Regret. "I wanted you to understand," she whispered. Then the force of the wind ripped her away. Ethan didn't look back. He jumped into the ship. The last-second escape. The hatch sealed shut just as the ship rumbled beneath him. Taro slammed his hand onto the launch controls. Hold on. The engines roared, and the ship lurched upward. Ethan felt the weight shift as they blasted toward the sky. The city below shrank, its golden towers gleaming against the dark horizon. Through the viewport, Ethan saw them. The golden-eyed beings, watching, waiting, still alive. As the ship broke through the planet's atmosphere, Lyra's voice whispered one last time inside his mind. You were never meant to leave. Then, silence. The planet faded into the distance. The vast blackness of space stretched before them. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan took a breath. They were free. For now. The final hunt. The ship trembled violently as it pierced the upper atmosphere. Ethan gripped the control panel, heart pounding. The engines roared, pushing them away from the nightmare below. But something was wrong. The controls flickered. The lights dimmed. A low hum vibrated through the ship's hull. Then, a whisper inside his head. You think you've escaped, Ethan. Ethan's breath caught. The voice was inside him. It was Lyra. And she wasn't gone. Taro noticed his expression. Ethan. Ethan gritted his teeth. We're not safe yet. The ship shuddered. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly, cold and empty. But something moved in the distance, a ripple in the void, like a shadow against the fabric of space. Then another, and another. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. They were following. The hunter becomes the hunted. The ship's radar blinked, detecting multiple signals. Fast. Unnatural. They're not letting us go, Taro whispered. Ethan's pulse raced. Can we jump to light speed? Taro's fingers flew across the control panel. The ship is too old. We need time to recharge the drive. Ethan's jaw tightened. They didn't have time. Outside, the golden-eyed creatures were closing in. No ships, no machines, just them, moving through space as if the vacuum meant nothing. One of them reached the ship, a blurred shadow against the viewport. Then, a hand pressed against the glass. Ethan recoiled. The fingers were too long. The golden eyes burned into his soul, and the thing smiled. You belong to us now. The ship lurched. The engines flickered. Ethan's chest tightened. Something was inside his mind, inside the ship. They weren't chasing him. They were already here. The nightmare on board. A sudden thud echoed from the cargo bay. Then another. Something was inside. Taro's face went pale. There, they're facing through the hull. Ethan grabbed a rusted metal bar from the floor. A weapon. Taro pulled up the ship's old schematics. There's an emergency lockdown switch in engineering. If we can seal them in, we might have a chance. Ethan nodded. Then let's move. Stay close. They stepped into the dimly lit corridor. The metal walls groaned under the pressure. The hum of the ship felt off, like something was breathing inside it. Then, a whisper. Not Lyra's voice this time. A chorus of whispers. We are here. The lights flickered. The corridors stretched, distorted. And the first creature stepped forward. It looked almost human. Almost. Its golden eyes glowed in the darkness, its form flickering between solid and shadow. Its mouth moved, but its words were not its own. It spoke in Ethan's voice. Help me, please. I don't want to become one of them. Ethan froze. The thing lunged. He swung the metal bar with all his strength. The creature shattered like glass, its body breaking into fragments of light and shadow. But behind it, more came. Taro grabbed Ethan's arm. Run. The last stand in engineering. They reached the engineering bay, sealing the door behind them. The ship's core thrummed with weak energy, struggling to keep up. Taro raced to the control panel. If I overload the reactor, it'll create a pulse strong enough to push them out of phase. But it'll only last a few seconds. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow. Do it. Taro worked quickly, fingers trembling. The creatures pounded against the door. The whispers inside Ethan's head grew louder. You can still surrender. You don't have to fight. You are already changing, Ethan. He gritted his teeth. No, he wasn't. The creatures began phasing through the walls. Taro hit the final switch. A massive energy pulse surged through the ship. For a split second, the creatures screamed. Their golden eyes dimmed, their bodies ripped apart by the force of the blast. Then, silence. They were gone. Taro collapsed against the console, panting. Did it work? Ethan exhaled slowly. For now, the final message. The ship's systems flickered back to life. The jump drive was finally charging. Ethan slumped into the captain's chair, staring at the vast emptiness of space. Where do we go now? Taro hesitated. Anywhere. As far as we can. Ethan nodded. He reached for the controls. Then, a final whisper. This is not over, Ethan. His hand froze. In the reflection of the control panel, he saw his own eyes. For just a second, they glowed golden. The last decision. Ethan stared at his reflection in the dimly lit cockpit. His hands trembled. His breathing felt too shallow. And his eyes, his own eyes, were wrong. For just a moment, in the reflection of the control panel, they had glowed golden. Just like theirs. Just like Lyra's. He clenched his fists, blinking hard. No, it wasn't real. He was human. He was still himself. But deep inside, a voice whispered. Are you sure? The nightmare isn't over. Taro sat beside him, exhausted, staring at the fading light of the pulse they had used to push the creatures out of phase. We did it, he muttered. We got away. But Ethan wasn't so sure. The ship's jump drive hummed, its ancient core slowly gathering power. The controls flickered, struggling to hold together after centuries of disrepair. Ethan had to hold on. He had to focus. Then, a whisper. Soft, gentle. You can still be saved, Ethan. He froze. That voice. Lyra. No, she was gone. He had seen her ripped away, lost to the void. Hadn't he? He turned sharply, scanning the cockpit. Nothing. Taro noticed his tension. What is it? Ethan hesitated. If he told Taro, would he believe him? Or was this the first sign that the change was already inside him? He swallowed hard. Nothing. Just tired. Taro nodded, not questioning it. We need to find somewhere safe. He motioned to the navigation system. Where do we go? Ethan looked at the screen. Stars stretched endlessly ahead, cold and distant. The ship had barely enough power for one jump. One chance to disappear before they found him again. If they weren't already inside him. He clenched his jaw. Focus. One problem at a time. They needed to get away. He keyed in random coordinates, as far away from this system as possible. A dead star, no nearby planets, a place no one would think to look. Taro confirmed the jump. All right, let's get out of here. The engines rumbled. The ship groaned, old metal straining under pressure. The stars outside began to warp, twist. Then, alarm. The ship shook violently. Lights flickered. The jump drive faltered. Ethan gripped the console. What the hell? Then he saw it. A shape forming outside the ship. A tear in space itself. And from within it, something emerged. They were never meant to leave. A black mass swirled beyond the viewport, shifting, stretching. It had no shape, yet it was there. And at its center, golden eyes. Countless, endless, watching. You thought you could escape. Ethan's chest tightened. They had followed. No, they had never left. The ship shook harder. The controls failed. The jump drive froze. Taro's hands flew across the console. They're pulling us back. Ethan's mind raced. No, he wasn't going back. Not after everything. Not after what they had done. He grabbed the emergency override switch. We can still force the jump. Taro's eyes widened. That could kill us. Ethan's grip tightened. Then we die human. Taro hesitated for half a second. Then he nodded. Together, they slammed their hands onto the controls. The ship screamed. Energy crackled through the cockpit. The engines burned white-hot. The void outside rippled, stretched, and then, a sound, deep and guttural. Not a scream, not a word. Something older, something angry. And the golden-eyed mass recoiled. The ship GMP'd. The aftermath. Silence. Weightlessness. Ethan's vision blurred as the ship ripped through space, torn between destruction and survival. His mind felt fractured, stretched between where he was and where he had been. Then, stillness. The ship stopped moving. They had made it. Barely. Taro coughed, pushing himself up from the floor. Are we alive? Ethan exhaled shakily. I think so. They sat there for a long moment, listening to the silence of deep space. No alarms, no golden eyes, just the quiet hum of the ship still holding together. For the first time, they were alone. Or so they thought. The final truth. Ethan checked the nav system. They were far from any known sector. No signals, no planets, nothing. It was perfect. They were finally safe. Right. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face. Exhaustion crept over him like a fog. His body ached, his mind stretched thin. Then, he caught his reflection again, and his heart stopped. His eyes, not golden, not yet, but in the dim light, they were starting to glow. Just barely, just enough. His breath hitched. Was it a trick of the light? Was it his mind playing with him? Or had the transformation already begun? A whisper deep in his mind, soft as a breath. You were never meant to leave. Ethan closed his eyes. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if he had truly escaped, or if he was still becoming one of them.